Well, it's time to talk about the last race in StarCraft 2, the Terrans. I've already made 2 videos where I broke down the main strengths and weaknesses of Zerg and Protoss, and today let's reveal the mysteries of Terran, and how they can exist in a superposition of being both the strongest and the weakest race at the same time. Honestly, Terran is the biggest scam for newcomers to StarCraft 2. Back in 2010, we only had one campaign available, the Wings of Liberty, which was a Terran campaign, and after finishing it you would, as a habit, start playing multiplayer as exactly that race. And maybe that's why there are still a couple percent more Terrans in the lower leagues. But pretty quickly, every player realizes playing Terran is an absolute nightmare. First of all, Terrans have the most complicated mechanics in this game. They are so obsessively detailed that it shows even in the smallest things. Building structures requires you to shift queue workers back to minerals, and the command center itself can be easily killed while it's being built, including the SCV that's actually building it. Terrans also need to know how to build walls and to plan infrastructure so that add-ons will fit, and they constantly need to swap their structures, which also takes another toll on their microcontrol. Their economy grows the slowest because SCVs are trained slowly, but that's compensated by mules, and you need to remember about them every 50 energy on your command center, and you should never miss a bit because otherwise you will be lagging behind in economy. And they also lack reliable scouting because scans drain the energy that you need for those very same mules and increased resource collection, so the higher the league, the less you'll use those scans and less information you'll get. But that's all minor things compared to what playing Terran looks like in combat. If you thought the army would be based on the sector's main human strength, the Dominion, and their countless tanks and battle cruisers as we know from the campaign, you would be wrong. Balance here is built around Raynor's raiders and the gameplay follows. A Terran army requires the most delicate handling and the highest level of microcontrol in this game. Marines and Marauders can die in a second to Banelings, Storms, Disruptors, Colossi, and in straight head-on to 100 supply fight, Terran army is the weakest in the game, so it demands incredible control and a ton of micro tricks, from the basic split to kiting, focus fire, stutter step and drop micro with medevacs. Playing Terran is the hardest thing in StarCraft 2 and possibly in all of gaming. Usually, any other race in this game gets some concessions at certain moments. Zerg, for example, don't need to micro their army as intensively, you just need to have a good surround and attack from multiple sides. But you still need perfect macro, ideal creep spread, injections every 40 seconds and also well-placed overlords. Protoss have simple macro and sometimes simple micro, but you must be also very attentive to enemy timings and cautious with expensive units, because if you lose one you might lose the whole game, but that's offset by a strong late game and very powerful units, especially when you hit around 200 supply. And Terrans, well, they are the only race even without that decent static defense, because think about it, Zerg or Protoss can spam spine crawlers or cannons, while Terrans have only bunkers that you still have to manually garrison with Marines. What is that if not a direct hint at how this race is supposed to play? Yes, later you get planetary fortresses, but they cost significantly more and they also appear much later. So basically, Terran gameplay could be best described by the General's Patton quote: "Terrans are the most aggressive race in this game. Don't buy into their propaganda that the Zerg eat whole planets and enslave worlds. A Terran will be the first to come and ruin your peace." Even though Terrans have many great defensive units, like siege tanks and liberators, which can form an impenetrable mobile fortress, this race is almost always forced to be the aggressor because of how the race balance and economy are structured. As I mentioned before, the Terran economy grows slower than the others. In both matchups, a Terran is always on a very tight timer, and if you drag it into the late game, real hell begins for players below Grandmaster League, especially if we talk TVP. But even if you play against Zerg, you must pressure the Zerg every couple of minutes, and since their larvae are used both for army and for workers, each extra batch of Zerglings slows their potential economic growth, which lets you even the pace with your opponent. And even if you are not directly dealing damage, that's the point of Hellions, Reapers, Banshees and other harassing units. But if you are sitting at your base doing nothing, in the first 7 minutes a competent Zerg player will make roughly 30 more drones and then win the game easily. So imagine this disproportion. One side must both attack, which is always inherently harder, and also build at home, lift and swap buildings, build supplies and other buildings as well, and also shift QS cities back to mining. Also research upgrades, produce units from 3 different hotkey buildings, this includes barracks, factories, starports, and also workers from command centers, and also drop news from those command centers, while the other side defends, enjoying good scouting thanks to overlords and creep. And I'm saying that as a Grandmaster Zerg player. From my experience, there's just nothing easier than playing against a lower skill Terran, because it's mechanically very hard for them to outplay me because of the enormous task load they have to carry. And in the current meta the same goes for Protoss. If the Terran sits passively, Protoss will also feel too comfortable and can quickly take up to extremely powerful units. But the problem isn't only numbers, because beating a Protoss late game army with a single A move is insanely hard. So once 3 to 4 Colossi and a couple of storms appear, a head-on fight becomes practically impossible. Terran is left to drop in several places at once and micro well, while simultaneously doing all the same things at home, building the economy, producing the army, and so on. And even successful damage doesn't really guarantee a victory, because one unlucky storm or a missed disruptor shot can bury you real fast, because your units are like jelly. Another interesting aspect of Terran play is that their army hits its peak around the 10-minute mark. In practice, Terran army doesn't really scale into the late game as well as the other races. That's both a plus and a minus. On the one hand, you use the same tools to win and get used to a certain unit composition. You develop muscle memory and reaction. On the other hand, there is just no simplification of the game, and actually the longer it goes, the harder it becomes, because yeah, there are ghosts and liberators, but they also require no less micro than the units that you already have. So even Terran late game doesn't let you breathe easily. You constantly have to move around and set things up in the siege modes, and also find time to land EMPs or snipe shots. The only good thing about its late game is that Marines remain very much relevant, and if you run out of gas you can remax on them, although this is also true for Zerglings and somewhat for Zealots as well. That's why it's very ironic that the starter race for all newcomers is also at the same time the hardest race in all of StarCraft 2. It's like the game is telling you from the very first hours that StarCraft, just like real life, won't be easy. It will be painful and tough. But, just like in real life, Terrans have an incredible gift of fate that other races either lack or don't have nearly as strongly, because Terrans have virtually limitless potential for skill growth. They simply don't have a ceiling. You can squeeze 300% efficiency out of almost every single Terran unit. The best example of this is Marines. A single Marine drop can move mountains in the hands of a skilled player. Marines, as you know, have extremely high DPS, but they are very fragile on their own. And it's in small skirmishes that their incredible potential shines. So let's start with simple numbers. For example, everyone knows a Marine dies to 2 Bailings, and if you get distracted just for a moment, your 8 Marines can be instantly blown up by just 2 cheap Bailings. But if you try really hard and perfectly split every Marine, suddenly it takes 16 Bailings to kill that same group, 8 times as many and way more expensive. And this happens very often on the pro level. The same thing applies to terrain usage. In a narrow choke or inside the mineral line, a Marine drop with medevac healing can potentially mow down 50 or even more Zerglings or other units, and with proper focus fire they can even take out Roaches and Hydras. Because of their low cost, Marines remain insanely cost efficient all the way until the late game. Other races simply can't do this. You cannot really micro Zerglings or Zealots much better. Usually you just A-move them, maybe surround, and that's it, their potential maxes out. Now imagine a player who can simultaneously control 2 such drops in different locations, while also managing the main attack in the middle of a map. Such people already walk among us. Clem or Maru, the best Terran players who achieve incredible results year after year. And although in the current meta even they struggle in TvP and they complain a lot about it, they still pull off miracles from time to time. Another fun fact, Terrans are very hard to kill, and that's a very common mistake when a player tries to commit 100% to killing a Terran player only to find out that he's actually the one who's on the ropes now.
I am the one who knocks.
Yes, their economy grows slower, but part of it is based on mules, free workers that mine at triple speed, and even if you lose a lot of SCVs but your opponent's economy is also quite bad, that allows you to make a miraculous comeback, as it happened many times in different scenarios. In the late game, Terrans can even get rid of SCVs and replace them with army supply once they have a bunch of orbitals, because this gives them more firepower on the battlefield while still maintaining an economy as efficient as their opponents. So I have a lot of respect for Terran players. This is truly the hardest race in the game, requiring enormous self-discipline and relentless work to reach the top. They rarely rely on easy build orders, they just always take the hard road and forge their own destiny. At the same time, thanks to the unique design of all three races, Terrans also have several cool advantages unavailable to others. The least obvious one: they are simply the most fun race to play. Terrans always set the pace of the game and create the pressure themselves. They also have the largest arsenal in terms of build orders. The number of unit combinations, timings and execution styles is practically endless. In ZVT alone, there are around 20 different mid-game builds you can mix and match. This makes every game unique, unlike Zerg, where it often feels like a Groundhog Day. The number of strategies is overwhelming, from proxy barracks to SCV pools and the boldest all-ins in this game. But what about those lazy Terran players who cannot handle the speed and pressure? There is an easy answer: just switch to mech. Despite Terran being the hardest race overall, probably nothing is simpler in this game than playing mech. Just build tons of tanks with a few supporting units, march across the map, siege up, and enjoy watching the enemy army get shredded. Fighting such a composition is extremely difficult, especially for Zerg. It requires top-tier skill, and it's like you swap places with a Bio-Terran, and now the Zerg is the one who has to sweat 3 times harder. There were even pro players with around 60 or 70 APM who could comfortably perform at a pro level using this composition. Mech itself also has different playstyles, from fast, dynamic compositions with Cyclones, Hellions and Banshees to heavy late game transitions with Thors, Liberators and Ghosts. So that's why Terran is the most fun race in this game. It is incredibly hard, but that difficulty is rewarded. You feel the power of every unit in your hands once you reach a certain level. Your skill growth is limited only by yourself. Infinity is not really the limit, and every new Terran champion manages to surprise us with micro down to the control of individual marines. And at the same time, they are the most unfriendly race for beginners. The race that punishes mistakes the harshest way because your army is just so fragile. And it's also the race most closely linked to carpal tunnel syndrome, a nerve condition in the wrist that many pro players suffer from. That's it for today. Which race is your favorite in StarCraft 2 and why? Share your thoughts in the comments, and thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, check out my other breakdowns of other 2 races in StarCraft 2. Have a nice day and see you next time.